Chapter 6 of Zhang Henshui's The Cause of Crying and Laughing, accidentally crossing the fragrant nest leads to heartbreak and illness. Passionate and enlightened Buddha bows his head to talk about sutra shower. Jiashu saw a handkerchief embroidered with English words and was wondering where it came from. When Liu Fu handed over a small name card, he suddenly realized that it belonged to Helena. Jiashu asked her when she came. Liu Fu said, "What time did he come here?" "After dinner here. He went dancing with the uncle and the young lady." Jiashu asked, "What is he doing in my house again?" "New?" She said that her cousin was not at home, so she came to see his house. She sat in the house for a while, flipped through the book, handed me a name card, and then left. Jiashu said, "Did you flip through the book? What book did you read?" Liu Fu said, "I didn't pay attention to this. Probably the books on the table." Jiashu then noticed a red book on the table. Feng Shi's photo was in it. If she opened the book, the photo would be revealed to her. So she opened the book and found the photo. The pages have been moved. It was originally sandwiched in the middle of the book, but now it is hidden under the cover. It seems that someone turned the pages and took the photo and looked at it. He didn't have much contact, so of course he didn't know who the photo was. If his cousin saw the photo, she would be questioned carefully. Moreover, Feng Shi's appearance looked a bit like Miss He's, which surprised her. Then, if I want to ask more questions, I will be forced to reveal the secret. Of course, it was very late at night when the uncle and his wife came back from dancing. Tomorrow, if my cousin knows about it at breakfast, she will be there. Ask. Let's read and answer tomorrow. Thinking like this, I couldn't help but prepare some perfunctory words to prepare a reply. But the next day, Mrs. Tao only said that Miss He came to visit specially last night and had to pay her respects, but she didn't mention anything else. Jiashu said, "I don't know their family, so I just went to visit Miss He. It's not a good idea. I'll go to the ballroom of the Beijing hotel to meet him next Saturday." Mrs. Tao said, "You are too much. You look down on the woman. She has come to visit you sincerely, but you don't bother to pay her respects. You have to wait until there is an opportunity." Jiashu smiled and said, "It's not that I don't bother to visit her at home for no reason. Miss, please be careful and beat her with a stick. Don't talk nonsense. Miss He's family is very civilized," Jiashu said. "How can such a thing happen? But I can only say these for words to explain, and can't say anything else." Bo He also said to Jiashu, "You should go and visit her. Miss He's family is very civilized. He has many boyfriends to visit, and he will never be rejected." Jiashu softened after the two of them said it. He smiled and agreed to visit Miss He once. One day later, the weather was very good. I wanted to visit Miss He that morning, but this morning, an unexpected letter came. The writing on the envelope was very uneven, and the bottom line was only signed details inside. When I opened it and looked at it, the letter read, "Mr. Jiashu Rendi's table review. Farewell to Ziyan. Stay for 10 days, respect the progress of civilization, obey the official duties, and serve a category as a song. The fate of a humble person is not good. The former is ill and is loved by others. The bad luck has turned into good luck, and now I am walking like a phoenix. I should have gone to my apartment to say thank you, but it is too inconvenient. Hinehi. At noon on the 10th day of the month, I will wait for the light under the roof and have a drink." Narration, it's a blessing not to. Without further ado, Tan. Guan Shoufeng paused. This letter has no more than 100 words in total, including the other characters, but it contains 3 pages and 8 lines. Judging from the tone, it seems that I copied many of them from the collection of rulers and slips. A person like him would never pick up a pen more than once in his life, so he could forcefully write out such a letter. Look at how sincere he is. Just thinking about this, I had to go to the appointment. Therefore, he cancelled his original appointment to visit Miss He and went straight to Shoufeng's house at the back door. As soon as I entered the yard, I saw a white stove in the house, and the briquettes were burning a strong fire. A small table was placed under the eaves, filled with meat and vegetable dishes. Shugu wore an apron and stood beside the table, with her 2 round and white arms bare, cutting vegetables. When she saw Jiashu coming in, she smiled and said, "Dad, Mr. Fan is here." As she spoke, she didn't even have time to put down the kitchen knife, so she took a step forward and opened the curtain for Jiashu. When Shoufeng heard about it, he also came out of the house to greet him, and said with a smile, "I'm afraid that something happened to you, or that you might not be able to come. Our girl said that as long as there is a letter, you will definitely come. She really guessed. When he said this, he stretched out his hand to hold Jiashu's hand and said with a smile, I thought it would be disrespectful to eat in a restaurant, so I bought some things and asked my daughter to make some home-cooked food to try. Don't talk about the taste. Look at our expressions. Show this. Jiashu said, after all, Uncle Guan is too polite. When he is really happy, he is willing to drink to cups whenever he comes. Why bother to go through a lot of trouble? Shofeng said with a smile, it seems that people are destined to have 3 blessings. To tell you the truth, this illness has made me sell out. How can I still have money to buy big fish and meat? Coincidentally, I came from the south the day before yesterday. A disciple is now a boxing teacher in the university, and he is better than me. When he saw that I was poor, he gave me some change, and I may want to go to him in the future. While talking, Shugu had already come in, grabbed a small mattress, spread it on a wooden chair, and let Jiashu sit down. Then he brought the kettle in and put a pot of tea on it. There were no tea leaves in the teapot at the moment, so I thought they had been prepared. After drinking tea, she brought in 2 more sanitary incense sticks, lit them, and inserted them into the old copper stove on the table. When she turned around, she saw that the teacup was still empty, but she came over and poured him a cup of tea. She said, with a smile, this is the tap water I asked for at the entrance of the alley. You drink some. She only said this, even though it was low. Head. Jiashu saw it in his eyes, and couldn't help but think in his heart, I have no interest in this girl at all. Why did she act so shy when she saw me? This tells me that it is not good for me to deal with it, and it is also bad for me to ignore it. Just be generous and pretend that you are confused and don't understand what she means. So you're welcome. Just talk to Shofeng happily. At that moment, Shofeng smiled and said, I am a cheerful person, brother. You are also a cheerful person. I have a few words. I will cover my face with wine and talk to you later. When he said this, he stretched out his hand and scratched it. He scratched his head, rubbed his palms again, and when he was about to continue talking, Shugu walked in, wiped the table, and placed the cups and chopsticks on the table. Jiashu saw that there were only 2 sets of cups and chopsticks, and said, why don't you put 1 less set of cups and chopsticks? Aren't you going to serve at the table? After Shugu heard this, when she was about to reply, the red marks on her face appeared. I got a little drunk in advance. Shofeng hesitated and said, no, she has to pack things, but that would be obvious. It's okay, Shugu. You have done all the dishes. Let's sit and talk together. If you have something to do, we can come back later. It's not too late to go. Shugu thought to herself, I have nothing to do, so she agreed casually and went to cook. Shofeng smiled and said, brother, look at my child. It really doesn't look like a child raised by a skilled person. If I weren't for her, I wouldn't have a family. This is also called the road of heaven and earth. But in the future, Shugu was cooking vegetables outside, taking a puff of oil fumes and coughing several times. Then she smiled through the window and said, fortunately, Mr. Fan is not an outsider. Otherwise, if you praise your daughter like this, why? What a joke. Upon hearing this, Shofeng burst into laughter, raised his hands and stretched. Jiashu saw Shofeng's 2 yellow-skinned arms, with muscles stretched out and showing some strength, and asked, Uncle Guan's spirit has recovered, but I don't know how strong he is. Shofeng laughed and said, you're old. You didn't have any in the first place. There is no such thing as recovery. But if you really want to take action, you can still protect yourself. Jiashu said, I admired Uncle's strength from the first meeting. There are other special skills that I can admire. Shofeng said with a smile, Brother Tai, I don't need to be humble to you. You have 2 skills, but I don't have them at hand. Shugu said, just bring something casually. Mr. Fan said, can we reject it? Shofeng smiled and said, since you say so, I will find a gadget. Look, the curtain is torn, and a lot of FLIs are flying in. Let me get rid of them. As he said this, he took a pair of chopsticks from the table, held them upside down in his hands, and sat down. When the FLIs flew over, he casually held the chopsticks in the air, and then brought them over to show Jiashu. Look, what is this? When Jiashu looked at it, he saw that the head of the chopstick was not resting, and it was holding a small fly in the right position. He couldn't help but praise it first, but he didn't know what skill the uncle had practiced. General Guan Shofeng said. As soon as the chopsticks were loosened, a fly fell to the ground. As soon as the chopsticks were stretched out, another fly came. He just stretched and clamped, and not long after, there were as many as 10 or 20 flies under his feet, and each one of them fell to the ground with their wings broken. Jiashu clapped his hands and said with a smile, "This is not just about seeing quickly and catching accurately. Now looking at the flies, every one of them is dead, which shows that the chopsticks are equally powerful." Shofeng said with a smile, "It's just something you do often. If you play it a lot, practice will make you perfect. It doesn't take much effort. If a person can't catch even a fly, wouldn't it be a joke?" Jiashu said, "I'm not a loser." The strange fly was pinched to death, but the body of the strange fly is still intact. It is not like the usual slap that makes the body bloody and bloody. Shofeng said with a smile, "You can still make a rationale for this little thing. Come on, it shows that you are willing to pay attention when something happens." Jiashu said with a smile, "When this ability is expanded, it seems that you can reach out and catch the hidden arrows sent by others. Martial arts, such as arrows, are probably similar to this method." Shofeng smiled and said, "Don't talk about it. It's useless now if you have that kind of skill. Who can run to the front of the array and stretch out his hands to catch the bullets?" Seeing that Jiashu couldn't stop talking about martial arts, Shugu came in with wine and food, and just pursed her lips and smiled. She gave Shofeng a pair of chopsticks, and she took a pair of cups and chopsticks and put them aside. Shofeng asked the family tree to take a seat, and the father and daughter accompanied him on the left and right. Shugu first brought the wine glass in front of Jiashu, poured a glass of wine for his wife, and then held it in both hands and sent it over. Jiashu stood up and said, "If you are so polite, I won't be able to eat enough. Girl, you can do whatever you want." As he said this, his eyes couldn't help but fall on Shugu's hands. Although her fingers were not as slender as Feng Shi's, they were still as delicate and white as snow. Those 10 fingers were shaved, revealing the ruby-like nail gaps. I thought to myself, father and daughter often express that this girl could inherit the family inheritance. Now look at her tender hands. May not be worthy of the name. With this thought in his mind, he was of course stunned for a moment. Shugu quickly shrank her hands and sat down. Jiashu suddenly realized she might have misunderstood. Yin smiled and said to Shofeng, "Uncle's ability is so amazing. This girl must be very good. But I carefully evaluated it. She is very gentle. I can't tell at all." Shofeng smiled and said, "Is she gentle? You're so complimentary. I'm a bit older these past 2 years, but she was really able to walk around the house in the early years." Jiashu looked at Shugu's appearance and said with a smile, "Everyone was naughty when I was little. When I came to Fianzan Zubi, I read northern novels when I was a child, and they always talked about this kind of thing. After arriving in the north, I realized that the houses in the north are very low and have roof tiles. It's embedded with plaster. It's not that difficult to climb over a wall." Shugu sat aside and smiled. While Jiashu was eating and drinking, he was talking to Shofeng and his daughter, and it was 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Shofeng said, "Brother, we had a great conversation today. If you have nothing to do, just sit here until evening and then leave." Jiashu sat down again because his father and daughter entertained him so kindly, and there was nothing to do when they returned home. At that moment, Shugu collected the dishes, wiped the tables and chairs, made tea again, lit incense, took a piece of her father's clothes, sat on a chair by the door and mended them, listening to the conversation but not answering. Later, Shufeng and Jiashu slowly talked about family affairs, and then talked about the Tao family. Jiashu said that his cousin's wife had 2 children, and Shugu seemed to have realized something. She said, "Oh, what school does that young lady go to?" Jiashu said, "She is very young and has never been to school." Shugu said, "Really? When I lived there before, I saw a young lady of 16 or 17 years old, who was very pretty, and went to school every day." "Who was that?" Jiashu smiled and said, "That girl made a mistake. My cousin is only 28 this year. There is no girl that old." Shugu seemed to have understood something just now, but when she heard this, her face was covered with doubts again. She looked at her father and lowered her head to sew clothes again. Shofeng saw Shugu refuse to leave, so he said, "I'll keep Mr. Fan for a while. Go get another pot of tap water." Shugu said, "I've prepared it a long time ago. I've got a big bucket of tap water at home." Seeing Shugu sitting there unwilling to move, there was nothing he could do, so he had to let her do what she wanted. Jiashu talked for a long time and stood up to say goodbye twice, but Shofeng always kept him until there was nothing more to say. Then Shofeng said, "I'll invite you to have tea in a place in 2 days. It's getting late, so I won't keep you." Jiashu smiled and said goodbye, and Shofeng sent him out the door. At this moment, Shugu was alone in the room. She quickly wrapped a paper bag and followed to the gate. She said to Shufeng, "Has Mr. Fan left? I haven't returned the books he lent me." Shufeng said, "He is going home. He has to hire a car to Daxi Hudong, and he hasn't hired it yet." Shugu rushed out of the door. Jiashu was still walking. Shugu smiled and said, "Mr. Fan, please stay." Jiashu never expected that she would chase him out to see him off, so he had to stop and asked, "Miss, you are polite again." Shugu smiled and said, "I'm not being polite. Please take the books you lent me back." Then she handed over the wrapped books with both hands. Jiashu said, "So that's it. It's not worth much. You can keep it. I'm not going home now. I'll leave it here with you, and I'll take it back next time." Shugu held the bag in her hand, lowered her head and looked at her hands and smiled. "Take it back. I've made some work for you." When she said the last sentence, it was almost impossible to make out what she said. There was only a faint sound. Jiashu saw that she was very embarrassed, so he had to take it, and smiled, then thank you in advance. Seeing that he had accepted it, Shugu said goodbye and turned around and went home. Shofeng said, "He is not going home. It's inconvenient for him to carry a bag of books everywhere." Shugu said, "You said he was going to Daxi Hudong. I believe it. I met him there 2 or 3 times. Once, he was walking with a female student." "Who is he?" Shofeng said, "You are surprised. In this day and age, what kind of people can men and women walk together? I am interested in asking him about his family details today, but you are here in person and there are many things I cannot ask. He is not supposed to have any relatives in Beijing." Shugu avoided the question when she heard her father say this, but she felt a little regretful. If she had known that her father had kept her here to talk to him on purpose, she would have avoided him earlier. What exactly did he mean? I will know tonight, and I will not have to worry about it all the time. If I miss this opportunity today, I don't know when I can ask him this question. However, judging from what happened today, it can be proved that my father did it on purpose. What I was afraid of my father's disapproval before is no longer a problem. But I saw Joshua walking with a female student in Daxi Hudong with my own eyes. Who is she? I feel uneasy if I don't explain this matter. I have been thinking about it for 2 days, but I still can't let it go. I seem to remember that there is a girls' school nearby. Could it be that the student here? I'd better find a chance to investigate. When she thought about it, she immediately felt that she had to go and see to comfort herself. So she told her father that she had something to go out for, and she went to Daxi Hudong to investigate privately, thinking that she might run into them again. If she greeted them face to face, who was that woman? He would have nothing to hide. When Shugu came to Daxi Hudong to investigate, it happened that she passed by 2 clumps of locust trees and a small red door. She felt that this family had a special kind of humor. She was stunned for a while, but she heard a man laughing from the low white wall. "I'll come again in the evening. Take advantage of the good moon and the fragrance of locust flowers tonight. Can you play a piece of Han Palace Autumn for me?" Shugu heard that the man's voice was Fan Jiashu. After the 2 small red doors had opened. It was too late to dodge. Jiashu was in front, and the female student she met last time was behind, walking out all the way. Jiashu was the first to call out, "Big girl, how did you get here?" Before Shugu could say anything, Jiashu said, "Let me introduce you. This is Miss Shen." He pointed to Fengxi beside him, and Fengxi walked forward, held Shugu's right hand with both hands, and said to her with a smile, "Mr. Fan often said you were here. It's rare to meet you. Please come to my house and have a seat." Shugu was confused for a moment after hearing her words. She thought that she was called Mr. after all, so it would be nice to go in and take a look. So she smiled and said, "Okay, I'll go to the mansion to take a look. Mr. Fan, please walk slower, okay?" Jiashu said, "Of course I'll accompany you." So the 2 of them led her in with a smile. When Mrs. Shen saw that it was Jiashu who let her in, she stepped forward to greet her, and said with a smile, "Miss, our place is just like Mr. Fan's home, so don't be polite. Shugu was startled again. What was he talking about? She was originally sitting in the outer room, but then Aunt Shen must have let her into Feng Shi's room, so she could hide in the outer room to serve tea and cakes and fruit plates. Shugu saw that the furnishings in this room were very elegant. On the front wall, there was a picture frame hanging high, and inside it was an enlarged half-length portrait of a man with a smile on his face, looking at people in a friendly manner. That was Fan Jiashu. At this moment, her heart couldn't help but thumping for a while, and she guessed that the matter was about 70% certain. Jiashu was also fearless and entertained guests in this room. Aunt Shen sent tea and snacks in. Seeing Shugu looking at the photo several times, she smiled and said, "Look, this photo is really like it. Mr. Fan sent it today and just hung it up. I said that this place looks like his home. That's true. We don't have many relatives and friends. I hope you will come often in the future for Mr. Fan's face. He is here every day." Aunt Shen said this, and Shugu's face turned red and white, and she looked very uneasy. Jiashu thought that she must have misunderstood, so he smiled and said, "I have never told Uncle Guan that I have relatives in Beijing before. Uncle Guan will probably be surprised when you tell him when you go back." Jiashu looked at Shugu. Shugu looked out the window at the sky and answered casually, "What's so strange about that?" The voice was very subtle, and seemed to have a little tremor. Joshua was silent too, with nothing to say. It was still the mother and daughter of the Shen family, asking about her family affairs, that would make him feel less lonely. After sitting and talking for about 10 minutes, Shugu pulled her clothes, stood up, said goodbye, and said goodbye. The mother and daughter of the Shen family insisted on staying, but how could they keep her? When Shugu went out of the door, she felt her whole body limp. Her feet could not stand, and she was about to sink. She quickly hired a rickshaw and went home. When she got home, she fell on the bed with her clothes on, pulled the quilt to cover her body and neck, and cried. Shofeng saw his daughter coming back. Her face was not right, and she hurried into the bedroom, but did not come out, so he stood at the door of the room, called out first, and stretched his head to look inside, only to see Shugu lying on the bed, with the quilt covering her upper half, and her 2 cross-legged pants naked, just trembling. Shofeng said, child, what's wrong with you?" After several questions, Shugu slowly answered in 3 words in the quilt, "It's me, sick." Shufeng said, "I was just fine. Why are you sick again?" As he spoke, he walked forward, leaned over, and stretched out a hand to touch her forehead. This time, he touched a handful of tears beside her eyes. Shufeng said, "You have a fever on your head, and you are touching the sweat on my hand. Take off your clothes and lie down for a while." Shugu said, "Okay, you go outside, I can take off my clothes and sleep by myself." Then he walked out of the room. Shugu hurriedly took off her long clothes and shoes, covered herself with a quilt, and went to sleep. Shufeng stood outside the door and called several times, but Shugu only hummed in response, meaning that she was asleep. Shufeng listened to her and knew that she was really asleep, so he didn't ask any more questions. But Shugu slept so well that she didn't make the bed until the lights were turned on at night, as if she was really sick. Shufeng walked into the room again, and asked softly, "Child, how do you feel? Otherwise, let's find a doctor to take a look." Shugu didn't speak for a long time, and then slowly said, "It's okay, let me sleep well for a night, and I will be fine tomorrow." Shufeng said, "Your illness is very strange. Did you get poisoned outside or did you walk too much and get tired? Where did you come from? You became like this." Shugu saw that her father asked this question. If she said that she went to Shen's house, it would make her look boring. If she said that she didn't go to Shen's house, she couldn't point out any other place, and things would be even worse. She had to pretend to be asleep and didn't hear it. Shufeng called a few times, but because she didn't answer, he went to the outer room. After a night, the next morning, the old crows on the tree of the ancient temple next door were still croaking. Shugu had woken up and kept coughing on the bed. Shufeng didn't sleep well all night because she was sick. When she coughed, he asked, "Child, are you feeling better?" Shugu wanted to keep silent, but she was afraid that her father would worry about her, so she had to agree. "I'm fine now, it's not a big problem. I'll be fine in a while. You go to sleep, don't worry about me." Shufeng heard her voice sound strong, so he thought she was not sick, and went to sleep. Unexpectedly, when he woke up, everyone in the yard had gotten up, but Shugu had closed the door and had not come out. In the past, Tea would have been prepared at this time, but today, even the coal stove was not on. Shugu must be very weak and could not get up, so she stopped talking, got out of bed, lit the stove, and went to make tea. At this time, Shugu had woken up. When she heard her father making tea, she felt very uncomfortable. She had to struggle to get up. She held the long clothes covering the quilt with one hand, and supported her head with the other hand. She stretched her feet on the bed, and was about to step on her shoes, but she felt her head sink. The tables, chairs, and utensils in front of her were spinning like windmills. She snorted and fell sideways on the bed again. After a long time, she slowly got up and heard her father take a bowl of noodles and put it on the table. She shouted, "Dad, you take a rest. I'm up. What do you want to eat? Let me wash my face and cook for you." Shofeng said, "If you can't get up, just sleep for a day. I also like to cook and eat by myself." At that moment, Shugu hurriedly put on her clothes, combed her hair in front of the mirror, looked at her own reflection in the mirror carefully, frowned, shook her head, sighed deeply, walked out of the room, and said with a smile, "I'm not sick, but I ran to the overpass yesterday to see if there were any acquaintances, and I was tired." Shofeng said, "You fool, from the back door to the front door, the whole city passed through. Why didn't you take a car?" Shugu laughed and said, "If I tell you, you will laugh at me. I forgot to bring money, and I only had a few copper coins left on me. I only came back to take a tram." Shofeng said, "Can't you hire a rickshaw and pay it back at home?" Shugu saw that there was no one outside the house, so she whispered, "Since you got sick, I haven't practiced anything. I wanted to walk around and exercise first, but I walked too hard and got tired." Shu Feng believed what he said and stopped asking. Shugu washed her hands and face, took the noodle bowl, kneaded the noodles and made a big bowl of noodles for her father. She only filled half of the bowl with white noodle soup, and did not go to the table. She sat aside and sipped it mouthful by mouthful. Shu Feng said, "Aren't you going to eat?" Shugu smiled and said, "You got up late, so you should be hungry first." Shu Feng did not pay attention to it. After dinner, he went out for a walk. Shugu was alone at home. She felt very upset today. She fell on the bed and slept for a while, but she couldn't sleep. She remembered that she hadn't combed her hair, so she got up and combed it in front of the mirror. She wanted to comb to buns, but when she combed in the middle, she felt it was troublesome, so she just combed a braid instead. After combing her hair, she made some water to make tea. The water boiled, and she made tea. She only drank half a cup and didn't drink it anymore. She was very bored, so she decided to find some work to do. So she took out the work basin and flipped through it casually, but she didn't know what to do. She put the work basin on her legs, propped up her chin with her hands, and was in a daze for a while. The environment became quiet. At this time, there was a faint sandalwood fragrance, which came through the air. At the same time, there was a sound of wooden fish, which came from the other side of the wall. This was the sound of a monk from Renshu temple next door chanting sutras. It turned out that this was a poor old temple. There was only an old monk in his 60s guarding the temple, Jingju. Shofeng had nothing to do, so he played chess with him to relieve his boredom. The monk often said that Shofeng and his daughter always had a bit of toughness on their faces, and advised them to recite sutras when they had nothing to do. Shofeng and his daughter both laughed. Because Shugu often sent him some vegetarian dishes, the monk once said to her, "Big girl, you are too honest. You have a thick heart, but shallow wisdom, which makes you easily troubled. When you have troubles one day in the future, come and tell me the truth." Shugu remembered his words because the old monk usually didn't say much. When Shofeng was sick, Shugu thought she needed the old monk and went to ask him for advice. He said, "This is sorrow, not trouble. Take good care of your father." Shugu, let it go. Today, she was restless, which could be said to be trouble. The sound of sandalwood and the sound of wooden fish reminded her of the monk's words, so she put down her work and went to the temple next door to find the old monk. Jingju was sitting by the Buddhist table, beating the wooden fish. When he saw Shugu, he put down the wooden fish and said with a smile, "Girl, don't panic. Talk slowly if you have something to say." Shugu didn't feel panicked. Hearing him say so, she slowed down her pace. Jingju asked Shugu to sit on a high group on the left, and then smiled. "You suddenly came to the temple today. Is it because of the matter of the surname Fan?" Shugu's face changed when she heard it. Jingju smiled and said, I told you a long time ago that a thick heart and a shallow eye are prone to troubles. Everything is a fate, and it cannot be forced. I think he has someone else in his heart. Shugu was deeply troubled by the old monk's words. As if she had seen it in person, she couldn't help but feel terrified. She knelt down to Jingju, shedding tears, and whispered, "Master, you are a lively person. I want to become a monk." He said, "Big girl, get up. I will talk to you slowly." Shugu bowed twice and came back to sit again. Jingju smiled and said, "Don't think that you will be surprised if I tell you your secret. You should know that the person involved is the most confused. Since you accompanied your father to the hospital, there is a young master Fan who often comes and goes. Who in the neighborhood doesn't know about it? I saw you sending Mr. Fan twice outside the temple, and then I understood." Shugu said, "I was wrong before. I want to follow the master to become a monk." Jingju smiled and said, "The word become a monk is not something you can say so easily. If you become a monk for something unsatisfactory, you can return to secular life for something satisfactory in the future. I have a vernacular annotated Diamond Sutra here. You can take it and read it. If you don't understand something, come and ask me. If you read this book carefully several times, you may have fewer troubles. As for becoming a monk, young people should not mention it, so as not to increase the sin of your mouth. Go back. This is not a place for girls." Shugu was shut up by the old monk's words. She could not say anything else. She had to take the Diamond Sutra from the monk and go back. When she got home, she opened the book as if she had found a treasure. She read some of the books, some of which she understood and some of which she didn't. However, she thought that the book could relieve her worries, so she didn't ask whether she understood it or not. She just kept her head down and read. On the first day, Shofeng thought she was reading a novel. On the second day, she accidentally covered the book and revealed the cover. It turned out to be the Diamond Sutra. He smiled and said, "Who gave it to you? Why are you reading this?" Shugu said, "I asked the old master next door for it, to relieve my worries." Shofeng said, "What? You want to relieve your worries?" But Shugu opened the book, bent her arms inward, leaned on the table, lowered her head, and muttered something in her mouth. She didn't hear what her father asked her. Shofeng thought that women were all superstitious, so he didn't care much. But from that day on, she actually understood the scriptures a little bit and enjoyed the book. She asked Jingju for 2 more sutras with vernacular annotations to read. At noon that day, Shofeng was not at home. She placed a small bronze Buddha statue given by Jingju in the middle of the table, and placed a small bronze incense burner in front of the Buddha. She lit a stick of incense and spread out the Lotus Sutra with shallow annotations, reading it page by page. The people in the same yard had gone to the street to do business, and the women took a nap. The house was very quiet. The sparrows on the eaves came down to find scattered food, but they would chirp once or twice in the yard from time to time. Shugu was reading the sutra alone in the room. She was reading it very well. Suddenly, someone coughed in the yard and asked, "Is Uncle home?" Shugu looked through the old bamboo curtain and saw that it was Fan Jiashu. She said, "My father is not at home. Mr. Fan, come in and rest for a while." When Jiashu heard this, he opened the curtain and came in. Shugu stood up to greet him and said, "Does Mr. Fan have a date with my father? He is not waiting at home." Shu was wearing a narrow blue gabardine suit with a red flower on his lapel. His hair had also changed and was combed neatly. With his fair face, he looked much younger. He lowered his eyelids immediately. Jiashu said, "I don't have a date. I came to the back door and visited you to have a chat." Shugu nodded and said, "Oh, I'll go make some tea." Jiashu said, No, I just want to talk and leave. Thank you, miss, for giving me a pillow last time. It's embroidered with bamboo leaves and plum blossoms. It's very nice. It must have taken a lot of effort, right?" Shugu said, "It's a small matter. Why are we still talking about it?" Jiashu sat down on a chair near the door. Shugu also sat down in the same place and lowered her head to turn 2 pages of the sutra. Jiashu smiled and said, "This is a woodblock book. What kind of novel is it?" Shugu lowered her head and shook her head, and said, "It's not a novel. It's the Lotus Sutra." Jiashu said, "The Buddha's scriptures are profound. I haven't seen you for a few days. Miss, you have made a lot of progress. It's not too deep. There are annotations in vernacular. Come down and read." Shugu relit a stick of Buddhist incense, and still bowed her head and sat down. She found a pair of small scissors in the work basin beside her, and slowly cut her nails. She cut and read and cut. Here Jiashu flipped through the book and smiled. This Buddhist scripture is really easy to understand. Do you have any experience, young lady? Shugu said, I dare not say now. Maybe I can get some benefits in the future. Jiashu smiled and said, I rarely see young ladies studying Buddhism. There are many old ladies. Shugu smiled and said, they all practice for the second half of their lives, or for one life. I am not like that. Jiashu said, everyone who learns something or learns something well has a reason. Young lady is not practicing for the second half of her life, not for one life. Why? Shugu shook her head and said, no reason, no practice. Reading the scriptures is just reading sutra. Learning Buddhism is learning Buddhism. Jiashu was surprised to hear this. He put the sutra on the table and clapped his hands and said, young lady, you have made great progress. This is not easy to read in books. Which great monk enlightened you? I didn't understand Buddhism at first. In the past, our school invited a good monk to preach the sutra. I listened to it several times. I know your words have a source. Shugu said, Mr. Fan, don't praise me. These words are often told to me by the old master next door. He said that the most taboo of Buddhism is the word greed. Cultivating the second half of life, or cultivating any life, is greed. So I don't say what to cultivate. Jiashu said, Uncle also often told me that there is an old monk in the old temple next door who is over 90 years old. He doesn't go out to do Buddhist things or beg for alms. That's him. Can I go to see him? Shugu said, no, he doesn't see strangers. Lend me 2 copies. Shugu had been lowering her head to do her nails. She raised her head at this moment and smiled at Jiashu, saying, I only have this. I have to return it to the master after I have read it. Mr. Fan is an ambitious person. Why would you read this? Jiashu said, so, I am not destined to be with Buddha. Shugu lowered her head again unconsciously and flipped through the scriptures and said, the scriptures are nothing but the word emptiness. If you don't understand the scriptures thoroughly, it is better not to read them. If you understand them thoroughly, everything will become empty. How can you still do anything? So I advise Mr. Fan not to read them. Jiashu said, so, the young lady has seen through everything and has seen everything empty. I have never heard the young lady say this before. Why did she suddenly see everything empty? Is there any reason? Jiashu's words asked something beyond the topic. Shugu could not answer in front of him. Instead, she suspected that he was asking on purpose. She just stared at the smoke from the Buddhist incense, which was curling in circles and slowly rising, and was in a daze. Joshua saw that she didn't say anything and felt that his question was abrupt. Just as he was regretting it, Shugu suddenly smiled and pointed outside, and said, listen, this is the reason. If you want to know what she wanted Joshua to hear, she will tell you next time. Alright, this part of the story ends here.
Want to know what happened next? Let's listen to the breakdown next time.